I don't know, there's just some Sundays, I don't know what it is, but there's some Sundays where you just come in and you feel a spiritual high. And I have one of those this Sunday. Hopefully you do too. We have so many visitors here, so many maybe old friends, and of course we've got some new family here too, and it is so nice to have you all here. Unfortunately, I might take the mood down a little bit because we're going to be talking about death. We're going to be talking about death this morning, and it's no one's favorite subject. I won't pretend like it is. I won't pretend that I am just pumped to be talking about death, but it's something we need to talk about. It's something we need to talk about because the Scriptures talk a lot about death, about getting ready for death, about what death means for a God-fearer, and what death means for someone who doesn't believe in God. And so I was thinking about this over the last few weeks. The Bible contains a lot of last words. We kind of get sometimes obsessed with last words. I don't know if you've seen, but if you're on the internet, there's lots of articles that I guess sort of tend to maybe our more morbid side. It's the last words of these famous list of celebrities. And some of them are ironic, or some of them are tragic, or whatever it is. There's a lot of, in fact, entire books just filled with the last words of famous people. I don't really know why you would want to read that. I flipped through some of them. It's just kind of sad. But there is something that last words tell us that maybe not a lot of other words do. Because there's not a whole lot of point in lying when you're on your deathbed. You don't really get a whole lot from that because you know you don't have a whole lot of time left. And so in some ways, these last words offer us some of the more insightful looks into the hearts of the people that say them. Maybe some of the most truthful words that they had ever said were the advice, the regrets, the hopes they shared with their last words on earth. And like I said, the Scriptures have last words all over the place. We talked some this morning at the table, but also Jacob talked last week about some of the last words of Jesus. We have the last public address of Moses in Deuteronomy. We have the last public address of Joshua. The Scripture's filled from one end to the other with last words. We're going to be in 2 Samuel 23 this morning. And 2 Samuel 23 gives us David's last words. And David's last words come as we've got an old king who's looking back on his life. And there was a lot of high highs in David's life, lots of amazing blessings of God. And there were a lot of low lows in David's life, a lot of things that I'm sure he regretted and wished he could have taken back. And so we get this elderly king looking back on his life and speaking to his family and assuredly the people and saying, hey, as someone who's lived it all and done it all, here's what I think you need to know before I go. And that warrants attention from us. Because David was a man who at the end of the day, despite his many, many flaws, was a man after God's own heart, a man who did love God very deeply. And so when he says to his family and to the people, and I think to all of us, listen, before I die, here is what you need to know. I think we need to listen up. I think David's got some wise advice that he's going to share with us today. Now, there's one thing I should let you know about the last words of David, and that is, they're not really his last words. See, the Scripture here is going to start the chapter with, these are the last words of David. And then David's going to talk a lot more before he dies. He's going to talk more in 2 Samuel. He's going to have more last words in 1 Kings, when I think he dies in 1 Kings 2. So you can decide what to do with this. Some people think these are the last words of David and they're just kind of put out of order. Some people think maybe this is his last public address to the nation, maybe his last inspired words. However you want to take that, the scriptures make it clear these are, in some sense, some shape or form, the last words of David, an old, wise king looking back on his life and saying, hey, here's what I need you to know. So let's just start by reading the last words of David together. We've already done that once this morning, but I think it'd be great to do it again. If you're in 2 Samuel 23 with me, we're going to just start in verse 1. 2 Samuel 23, starting in verse 1. It says, "These are the last words of David, the declaration of David, the son of Jesse, the declaration of the man raised on high, the anointed one by the God of Jacob. This is the most delightful of Israel's songs. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke. The Rock of Israel said to me, the one who rules the people with justice, who rules in the fear of God, is like the morning light when the sun rises on a cloudless morning, the glisten of rain on sprouting grass. Is it not true? Or is it not true my house is with God? For He's established a permanent covenant with me, ordered and secured in every detail. Will He not bring about my whole salvation and my every desire? But all the wicked are like thorns raked aside, for they can never be picked up by hand. The man who touches them must be armed with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they will be completely burned up on the spot." You know, I love that David starts his last words here with a reminder of who God is. Not a reminder of himself, although he will get there, but he starts with a reminder of who God is. Verse 3, that God is the rock of Israel. That for the nation and for God's covenant people, all success, anything good that's going to happen must be built on their relationship with God. And so then David affirms his own relationship with God. The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me. Again in verse 3. David is really trying to drive home that even though these are his last words, they are almost not just his words. They are the words of God's own Spirit. They are ordained by God, you might say, which makes them even more important for us. It adds even more significance. This is the united message of our God and a man who loved our God very dearly. This is what they want us to know. And David's first instruction is very simple, again in verses 3 and 4. When one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. So in other words, when the king is good, life is good. But notice it's not just that the king is good. It's not any type of good. It's specifically that the king is righteous. When the king follows God's law, when the king cares about justice, when the king cares about goodness, life is good for the people. It's essential to being an effective leader. The way David puts it here is you cannot have a good leader without having a godly leader. There's no such thing as a good leader who isn't a righteous leader. I would think that'd be even more important for Solomon, David's son. He's about to take over the throne when David dies here in a few chapters. It almost feels like for a second you can picture David sort of turning to his son and saying, hey, I need you to listen up. Here's something really important for you to know. Like a lot of what we see Solomon write down when he writes down the fatherly advice in the book of Proverbs. That's what we kind of see here with David. It almost feels like he's turning to Solomon and saying, hey, here's what you need to know before you take the throne. There is one benchmark for if you're going to be a good king or not. And it's, are you sticking with the righteousness of God? That is the be-all, end-all. And even though it clearly does apply to a king, that's what it is most immediately about, I think we can see application for that in a lot more than just being a king. Because I don't know about any of you guys, but I'm probably not going to be a king before I die. It's not looking likely for me. And I doubt that any of you guys are probably going to inherit royalty in the near future. But I think David's words have a lot of application to every facet of our life. I think this same principle applies, and the scriptures make sure that it's clear that they apply to parents. You can't be an effective parent. You can't be a good parent without being someone who is ingrained in the righteousness of God. You can't be a good elder or a deacon without being someone completely led by justice and righteousness above all else. You can apply that to any sort of influence that you can possibly have. If you're a boss, if you're just a friend that maybe other people come to advice for, whatever your relationship is, David makes it clear that if you're with God, God's going to take care of the rest. That any influence you have, if you are reflecting people towards righteousness, if you're reflecting people towards His law, you can rest assured you are leading well. And what that means by contrast is if we're relying on our own ingenuity, if I think I'm smart enough to just lead a whole bunch of people, David's saying, you need to stop right there. Because this is what matters. Effective leaders are righteous leaders. Effective leaders are godly people, and that's it. That's it. That's the only benchmark. So if you're even just looking to be able to be a good influence on those around you, and hopefully all of us are, this is where we start. It starts with your relationship with God. Can people see that you are living out the laws of God? Can people see your relationship with God just in the way you speak and the way you act and the way you forgive and the way you handle conflict? Because David says, if they can see God's righteousness reflected in your life, that's a good life. That's a good life. And David really continues on with that same idea when he talks about the benefits of this righteous reign, right? When there's a good king, it's like sunlight. It's like rain. It's essential for growth and survival. What David is saying is for God's people to flourish, for any people to flourish, this is a necessity. People's spirits wither and they die without godly influences around them. And so, David's saying, for all of us, we need to listen up here. Can people see the relationship you have with God by the way you live, by the way you lead? And David continues on. He draws on the words of God. Remember 2 Samuel 7. I'm going to read a few verses there if you would like to turn there. God establishes a covenant with David, just like He did with Abraham before. And I'm going to read some of these promises of God. Notice in verses 11 and 12 of 2 Samuel 7. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a dynasty or house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up offspring after you who shall come from your body, and I will establish His kingdom. Skipping down to verse 16, ending this with, and your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me, and your throne shall be established forever. And so David draws on those same exact ideas here in his last words. He says, sort of to the people, here's how you can know what's going to happen after me. God's already said Solomon is going to reign. David says in verse 5 here, God has made with me an everlasting covenant. That comes from 2 Samuel 7. And of course, we know, as we've talked about even in the Bible class hour this morning, if you were out in the auditorium, we know that has ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. Once you see that, it just jumps off the page. David doesn't know that yet. And so David is talking about his own kingdom, and he says God has established it. It's going to continue because he said so. Because I know that he is faithful. What he says always comes true, and so I know that I can rely on that. And David affirms that truth by drawing on his own past. Look at what he says God has already done for him. He says he always delivers me, something David would know a lot about. From Saul to Goliath to Absalom to even when he was a little shepherd boy and he was fighting wild animals, God has been there the entire time delivering and saving David. And so David says, will he not cause to prosper all my help and desire? It's almost the idea there of, if God has said, I'm going to do this for you, and every time God has said that before, it's come true, I don't have to guess what's going to happen next. And so David draws on that idea to say, look, God has always been with me. He's never let me down. And so, of course, I believe him when he says he's going to be with my family. He's going to be with my throne line. He's going to be with my people. Of course, because God has never been unfaithful. And so David affirms, I trust that God is going to do what he says he's going to do even long after I die. Because that's who God is. And then David finishes these last words with sort of the opposite picture. Though it's going to be amazing and great for David's family, it's going to be great and amazing for God's people, it's not going to be good for the wicked. It's not going to be good for those who fully reject God. Notice again, verse 6, the evil are plucked and thrown away like thorns. But what I find fascinating is that he says not only that, they're hard to handle. They're dangerous. The idea that he has there, that if you try to remove thorns, you can't just go in and grab them, because what happens if you try to grab thorns? It hurts. You don't want to touch thorns. And so he says even people that are removing them, they've got to have all these tools and other things to sort of clip them out so they don't have to touch them. That is the exact opposite of the picture of the righteous leaders from earlier. Remember, righteous leaders, they're sunshine. They're rain. They bring growth. They bring blessings to everyone around them. And the wicked, you can't get too close to them or they're going to hurt. What's the idea there? The idea is, David kind of simplifies it to two paths. If you're on God's side, you are going to bring blessings and amazing life to everyone around you. And if you reject God, you're going to hurt yourself and you're going to hurt others. To the point where David finishes these words by he calls them worthless people in verse 7. They are less than useless. They are bringing people down to their level. And David concludes the last words with the assurance, these evil people will be completely burned up right where they lie. David says, assuredly, God is going to take care of wickedness forever. And you get to choose which one of the two paths you're on. Are you on the path of the sunshine and the rain and all the growth and all the good things? Or are you choosing the path of pain and destruction and all sorts of bad things? There's a lot of depth in David's last words, and so I just wanted to save a few minutes to just really sort of try to apply them together. And I think the main idea that runs through this section of last words is the contrast, like we were just talking about, of the lives of the righteous and the lives of the wicked. Because it could not be more stark. David says that those who follow God's word, those who love justice, those who love God, bring growth and bring life. To live with God is to have everything. What's the way that Kevin talks about it in almost all of his prayers, right? He said, to understand that if you have God, you have everything. And that's the exact thing that David says here. To live with God is to have all of the amazing blessings this life has to offer. It is to bring growth and relationships and life to those around you. It's to lead effectively. It's to have a successful, good life. David says all of that starts with your relationship with God. And then when he turns around to the wicked, he says they're completely miserable. Now, that doesn't mean that they never suffer at all in this life. In fact, the majority of the Psalms of David talk about how the wicked seem to prosper and they never have anything bad happen in their life. But when David looks to the end of their life, he sees it doesn't end well for them. That's the same idea here. It's not that if you're wicked, you're going to be poor and homeless and all of those things. That's a very worldly mindset. That's not what the Scriptures talk about here or anywhere. The idea here is when David looks to the end of life, as he is doing on his last words, he says, the wicked don't end up satisfied. They end up with regrets. They end up hurting people. They end up bringing people down with them. And you don't want that. And so David warns us now, like I'm sure he wished someone would have warned him before some of the mistakes he made, don't even try it. Don't go down that path, because it's not going to end it well. When David puts it like this, when David sort of simplifies it to these two clean-cut paths, there's good, and the good life brings good things, and the bad life brings bad things. It's really easy to know which side you want to be on. I don't think there is anybody here that's going to raise their hand and say, I would love to be a failure in life. I would love to be miserable. I would love to have all sorts of bad things happen. No one's going to raise their hand for that. But then you get to, okay, now I have to actually live it. And that's where it's hard. That's where it's hard. Because all of us can look at these two clear paths and we can see it is such a better path. It is such a good life to be with God. But what do I do with it? How do I get there? I think about this. David was about as successful gets by worldly standards, right? I mean, you think, a literal king, super cool warrior, fought amazing battles. David and Goliath, right? That story still gets talked about to this day. He had it all. He was rich. He was also like a musician and poet. He just could do everything. David was so amazing. And I think maybe if I was David, if I was looking at my last words, maybe I'd want to be like, hey, did you guys see everything I did in my life? Did you see the battles I fought? Did you see the songs I wrote? Did you see my amazing kingdom? And David doesn't do a single bit of that. Ask yourself why. Because David here is trying to tell us how to find a good life. And David, a man who had tried it all out, he found what was really important. And it wasn't the battles, and it wasn't the riches, and it wasn't the physical successes. He said, I find one thing important, and it's my relationship with God. And so I want to talk for just a minute about the way we define success in our own life. Because everybody wants it. And every single book that you see at Walmart or on Amazon is trying to tell you, here's the 5 key steps, how you can have a good life. Eat this, don't eat that, wake up at this time, invest this way. And it just is so much noise all the time. It's easy to get lost in. David simplifies it for you. David says, here's the key to a good life. It doesn't have anything to do with what time you wake up. It didn't have anything to do with what your 401k looks like. David says, here's what you need to know. Are you with God? Because if so, that's a good life. So I want to do a little thought experiment with you. Let's just say, at the end of your life, you're poor, you're homeless, you don't have a cent to your name, never got your dream job, you don't have friends and family around you, but you have God. You still have that relationship with Him. Is that a good life? Is that a successful life? Because by worldly standards, no. That's about as bad as it gets. But David says that's a good life. Because if you have God, you have everything. Now, I hope not a single one of those things happens to you guys. I love you all. But we need to be ready to say that come what may in this life, if I have God, I have everything. Think about it from the inverse. Let's say you get that dream job, you've got a big, beautiful house, you've got 4 cars in the driveway, whatever your thing is, everybody has their thing that they love. Whatever your thing is, imagine you've got all of it. But you don't have a relationship with God. The world will tell you you're a success. Jesus calls that choosing the world over your soul. And He says that's a complete and utter failure. And David looks at you and he says, which one would you rather have? If those were the 2 paths before you, which one would you choose? And so this comes back again to how we identify ourselves. And let me tell you, that is the key to whether you are going to actually follow this advice. Because you can know it's good advice. I think every single one of us here knows it's good advice. We believe it. But are you going to do it? That comes down to where is your identity. Because let me tell you, your identity is not in being an American. Your identity is not in being from Arkansas or wherever you're from. Your identity is not in being white or black or Asian. Your identity is not in your career. Your identity is not in your possessions. Your identity is not in what you're good at. Ultimately, your identity is not even in your family. Your identity is not in being Republican or Democrat. Your identity is not in your tax bracket. All those things can have some value to you. All those things are things that can be useful and good when put in their proper context. But at the end of the day, you have one identity. And that is you are a Christian and you are with Jesus. And that is the context by which we put everything else. That is where we take our pride. That's where we find success, is if I have Jesus, I have everything. And if I don't have Jesus, I don't have anything. Do you believe that? I need you to believe that. And when David gets down to his last words, it seems like that's what he believes. And that's important, because let me tell you, let's think about your own last words. It's not fun. Nobody likes thinking about them dying someday, but I need you to do it with me. Because someday you're going to die. And when you die, the moment you're gone, you're not going to care about the politics of this world anymore. You're not going to care about what's going on here. You're not going to care about how much money was in your bank account. You're not going to care about how great or terrible your job was. None of that is going to matter to you the moment you die. Because one thing remains. Did you have that relationship with God? Someday you're going to be on your deathbed. It's going to happen to all of us. And maybe you'll have a chance to look at your loved ones. To give last words, kind of like David does here. Say, here's what went well, here's what didn't go well. Here's what I found was the key to a good life. What are you going to tell them? Are you going to tell them, I tried it all out. I wasted a lot of time focusing on things that did not matter. I spent a lot of time accumulating wealth. I spent a lot of time focusing on politics. I spent a lot of time getting distracted. And if I could do it all over, I would have spent more time in this Word. I would have spent more time forging relationships in the church. I would have spent more time just focusing on what actually mattered. Or are you going to be able to tell your loved ones, I got it. I understood my mission. I stuck with it. That's what we all want. That has to start now. So as we offer the invitation, where is your heart set? Where is your identity? Because if it's anything other than your relationship with Jesus, we've got to change that. We got to recalibrate. Because if our compass is off, if our identity is off, the life is going to follow. So let's refocus together. If you're not a Christian, this is the time where you can affirm, I am ready to join the things that matter. You can repent of your sins. You can join Jesus in the waters of baptism. You can come into that relationship and say, I'm finally ready to get on the good path that David talked to us about. But let me tell you, a lot of us here are Christians, and if we're honest with ourselves, we've lost our identity. We've gotten distracted. We've started caring about a whole bunch of things that at the end of the day, they do not matter. Let's focus up. Because David says, look, when my life was good, it wasn't because I was worried about the day-to-day running of the kingdom. It wasn't because I was worried about this nation and this nation and this nation. My life was good when I understood my relationship with God. And when David's life is bad, it all comes out of a consequence of him losing his focus. I don't want that for you. So let's focus up while we still can. If you are a Christian and you've lost your focus, let's talk about it. We'd love to pray with you and pray for you and just help you any way we can. If you need, feel free to come to the front as we stand and as we sing.